Welcome back, listeners. You are listening to Women's Issues, Women's Voices, and this is Victoria. And I am in my Zoom studio with Kaitlyn Shetler. We're having a wonderful conversation about poetry as resistance and revolution and transformation. And it just makes me very excited. And so if you didn't, if you're just logging in now or tuning in, I guess would be more appropriate. I discovered Kaitlyn because someone shared one of her poems on Facebook, and you can find her at Kaitlyn Shetler Poetry on Facebook. I also wanted to ask you about this Buy Me a Coffee. I love that. Is that buymeacoffee.com? Is that or something like that?
.com, yeah.
Yeah, okay. That like if you really enjoy a Kaitlyn, or I'm guessing other people who put their work out there for free, right? You can go on there and buy them. In this case, a Tom Hanks movie. I'm guessing you like Tom Hanks, just a little bit.
Yes, yeah. I love Tom Hanks. That has been an obsession of mine probably since I was like in second grade. Wow. And then it just took, and I have been probably Tom Hanks' biggest fan. He doesn't know.
He doesn't know.
He doesn't know. No.
Someone should tell him.
He needs to tell him.
Yeah, I have to tell you that the movie where he's on the island, like that movie.
Castaway.
Yeah, Castaway. Thank you.
Yeah.
Like I have used that metaphor about hanging on to the raft and then trying to go after the ball, right? And like not staying with your raft because you're trying to go after something you've developed a intimate connection to, but it no longer serves you. I think that's a really good segue into your story, right? You know, so part of your process as a poet has been, it sounds like, can I call it a recovery process?
Absolutely.
Yeah, a recovery process from a more fundamentalist Christian upbringing, which you were really a big part of. And it came into conflict with your, like, it doesn't, like in my head, I'm like, seems like it shouldn't, but like that social work part of you, right? Like, you know, because it seems like that's what Jesus was about, social work. But for you, it became a conflict.
It did.
Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, definitely. And I think recovery is good. I think reclamation is good too. It's both. Yeah, I grew up going to church. That was what we did. That was what I spent all Sunday. You know, we would go Sunday morning service, Sunday evening service, then we would do Wednesday night services. So we were very, very integrated within our faith community. And I grew up Church of Christ. My dad was in the Air Force. I was the only child, and we moved around a lot. So you know, I think I counted about 13, 14 moves that we had while I was growing up. And every state that we would live in, you know, the first thing that we would do after getting settled in our house would be find a church. Because
the structure.
That was the structure, and that was the community. Like that was where we would find the support. You know, that's where you would find people to help you move in, to move out. That would be the people that you would go to while you know, he was at work or TDY. You know, we would go to church, and so church was our people. I am very, very lucky to have parents who raised me to always speak my mind, who were always very happy to listen to anything that I had to say, and really put me first. But we were the three of us were all very integrated into
Mhm.
this faith community. And the Church of Christ specifically is, evangelical, fundamental. It is Christian. A lot of the churches that you would go into felt like they were the only church. So if you weren't going to a Church of Christ, you were not going to go to heaven. It was
Mhm.
very black and white type of faith. There were
Mm.
rules that we had to follow. There was a structure that had to be followed. And churches would look kind of different, but basically have the same sort of rules to them, which was, men were leaders, women were helpers, men preached, they taught, they did the Lord's Supper, they did the baptism, they did the ministry, women supported, they cooked the meals, they took care of the children, they led women's ministries to teach women how to cook the meals and take care of the children. And my faith was as strong as could be, based upon how they said to live your life as a Christian kid, Christian teenager, Christian
Yeah.
girl. That
Because it
was
sounds like
me.
it has a lot of clarity.
Yeah. Oh yeah, very,
Clarity.
very
And as
clear.
long as you have the capacity to live within that clear rules, it sounds like this is I mean, like I find myself feeling in my heart like I do understand how that can be very comforting if that's where you feel comfortable, and also very uncomfortable if that's not how you're made, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that is where you found people. So in my journey, I went to school. Again, I enjoyed talking. I enjoyed performing. I enjoyed really a lot of, I enjoyed Bibling. I would, I love
Fascinating book.
I love the Bible. It was all these things, and it was leading me to a place where I was like, oh, I would love to be a preacher. And where?
Okay.
Who? Where? What?
So
And so
in your faith tradition, there are no female like ministers, there's no place for a female to be. Is the
definitely
word proselytizing or preaching or
preaching,
okay.
and definitely not when I was growing up. And if it did exist, it existed very much on the outskirts. I think you would find more and more there are more progressive and liberal congregations who are considering it or doing it, but it's still within the purview of a man. And I felt what I thought was called to do this, and I was told over and over again that there's no way that could be a calling from God, because God wouldn't put you in a position that would be sinful.
Wow.
And so either God is testing you, right, for you you
Oh.
have this you have this dream or calling or whatever, and God is testing you to know that you've got to follow
So that's the flip
plan.
side of resistance, right? Like that you feel this calling from God, and like you should resist it. That's a different form of resistance.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So is this a good place to bring the poem in, or do you have something else you want to say?
No, actually, I think this is a really good place. This next poem speaks to, I feel like I could spend hours and hours talking about kind of the implication of growing up Church of Christ and growing up in a very conservative Christian faith system. But this next poem kind of speaks to being a woman in this system, where it's not only you can't speak, but you have to look a certain way. You have to act a certain way. And then purity and modesty are huge, because an impure, quote unquote, girl, is not a girl that can be easily controlled. An immodest girl is not a girl who is using her body to serve God, but herself. And so there is and these are the things that I was taught, right? And so this is what girls hear from the very beginning to when they grow up. So this poem right here is addressing that. This is called Hottest. I don't want your rings or pledges, but the church does indoctrination better than education, so why not stick to your strengths? You've made shame into a delicacy. Bread and wine have nothing on devouring bodies and reputations and women. You see chastity as a hard line and a straight line, and you see gay as crossing the line and never recognize who you've condemned to die. You baptize bodies to rid them of filth, as if your own sermons aren't repulsive and your rules don't reek. But my body isn't dirty, and I don't need holy water to prove my heart is clean. You spit in cups and crumple roses. You measure shorts and turn up noses. But I'm not convinced you understand the risks, because a dangerous game breeds a dangerous people who believe abuse is modest and modest is hottest and sweaty women make good wives. I presented my body at the altar of God and asked him to make it good. She scoffed and said, "You're perfectly fine. I did the best I could." So if God's best offends your faith, don't take it up with me. I didn't write your rules or forge your rings. You won't own my purity.
I wrote, you can't see this at home, listeners, but I wrote, I love it next to that. I presented my body at the altar of God and asked him to make it good. She scoffed and said, "You're perfectly fine. I did the best I could." That resonated for me because listeners may not know, because they know me as a, outspoken pagan. But, I had a time where I really did. I tried to be Christian. I grew up in a community where there were your two choices: Christianity or non-believers.
Right.
And that's exactly what happened. Is like what I found was this divine feminine, and she spoke to me and said, you are not sinful. You are not a sinner. You are divine.
And that's not the narrative that most churches want women to embrace. Changes the game.
Yeah.
They lose control.
And then there's the question of, but do they really have control, right? Like, yeah, and that's like I said, if it works if it's one thing, and it may have been on your Facebook or somewhere else, but it's like that there's a difference between like, this is how I want to live my life.
Yes.
This is the kind of relationship that I want to be in, right? This is the choices that I want to make as a family. That's very different than, and everybody else needs to live like by my rules so that I'll be comfortable, right? And that's one of the things that I struggle with Christianity. Even when I was a Christian, was this idea that if other people are still acting in a way that my faith believes is a sin, that it casts doubt on me, right? And I am just like that line where you're like about the dangerousness, that about this dangerous game, right? Yeah.
I think there's so much to be said along this line of um, what it means to grow up as a woman in this culture, and the women
Mhm.
who you know really love it and benefit from it, and the women who are screaming internally because it's just eating them up inside, and um, they aren't heard, I don't think. And I think what happens is you find that if you are allowed to speak in a lot of these spaces, you're allowed to speak from a place where you're going to continue to encourage people to be part of the fold.
Mm,
And you aren't going to be allowed to speak if you're encouraging any life outside of that. And so I think there are a
mm,
lot of people who are within these systems who haven't heard that there is another way other than the way of making
mm,
yourself into, whatever this perfect woman, this perfect Christian
mhm,
woman looks like.
mhm,
If anything, my writing doesn't make a lot of the people that I grew up with happy.
mm,
It doesn't make a lot of the people who I used to work with, or um,
mhm.
who led the churches that I went to, happy. But
Then why do they read it? I mean, that's the piece that I find, you know, baffling to me, right? There's something about it that they're attracted to read it, right? Um,
if anything, my hope is that whatever I say gets to the people in those congregations who
mhm,
do feel like things are eating them up inside and
mhm,
don't know that that's okay.
mhm.
So even if it means some preacher from wherever posting a poem on their wall and saying, "Don't listen to this heretic," somebody
Mhm.
hopefully will come and see it and be like, "Hey,
You
like,
know,
let's
that's
see
funny
her
because
out."
so I can remember, I'm quite a bit older than you, and I can remember um I was in my I must have been in my late 20s because because my daughter was in kindergarten, I think, and so that would have been like I would have been like 29, 30, and there was the banned book like upsurge in my hometown,
Okay.
and I so appreciated that list. So I
Yeah,
knew every book that
you're
I
like, "There."
hadn't read yet
Yeah,
that I needed to read, you know,
absolutely.
and that's the same, it's the same idea that it's like, oh, if you're wanting to ban it, and that's the thing is, like, did I agree with every single one of those books? No. Like, did I enjoy them? Not all of them. Like, I personally find the Lord of the Ring, not the Lord of the Rings, the Lord of the Flies.
Oh, yeah.
I like the Lord of the Rings, I enjoyed that, but the Lord of the Flies, like, I just didn't enjoy that book.
Yeah,
However, I really do value it as a piece of literature. It wasn't, and that's not supposed to be enjoyable. Yeah, right?
right,
It's supposed to
right,
be thought provoking. And
right.
that's, yeah, yeah,
Exactly,
yeah,
exactly.
right. And that's what I wanted to bring to this show, was that
Thank you.
to share your work, even though you do have, I know, a fan club already, um, right? To more people. You said something before we were get on air about, for you, poetry is a way to speak your truth,
Yeah,
right?
absolutely. Poetry, I I think I said this to you. I feel like I could write novel upon novel upon novel trying to get out what it is that's churning inside of me that I'm trying to say, and it just doesn't speak to
Mhm.
it the way that poetry does for me. the way that I can write something and sometimes just not even think about what I'm writing. I just have all this stuff inside. And so like I just start writing and then I come back and I look and I'm like, oh, like it's like a discovery process for me. I didn't even know that I was thinking this or feeling this until I get it on paper and I'm like, it's given me clarity. It's given me my truth. It's given me, it helps me look deeper into what it is I'm struggling with and what I believe and all of that. And it speaks it to me so much better than me sort of rambling to my husband at like 11 p.m. at night, like, can you believe this is happening? You know?
Yeah, and I have a theory about that because in my years of writing, I too love to write. Even short stories for me, I find that I get more in my cognitive, right? I've written. In fact, I was telling you that as I've been moving and I'm unpacking. I've been keeping a journal since I was 8 years old, right? So I've got boxes and boxes and boxes of journals and writings, and as I'm pulling them out, like I had one short story, but really it wasn't a short story. It was a paragraph poem, right? But because I feel like for me, and not that there aren't amazing novelists who evoke emotion, but for me, that's it. I can really tap into my emotional tone and my sensory body when I write poetry. Yeah.
Absolutely.
So Kaitlyn, I know you have one more poem and then we're going to go out.
Okay.
You said that you did talk about this poem on a podcast.
I did.
So, and if you would like, I can share that on the event, the Facebook event, so people could check that out. Is there any other way that folks connect with you?
So I am on Facebook, Kaitlyn Shetler Poetry. You can just search it and you will either find it or people yelling about it.
All in caps.
Yeah, in all caps. Or you can find me on Instagram. I'm on Instagram as well at Kaitlyn Shetler. You can find me on Twitter. I don't tweet that much, but I am there. It's at Tough Taffy, TUFFTAFFY. And you can always send me an email if you want to. It is KaitlynHardyShetler@gmail.com. So I would love to connect with anybody who wants to connect. This has been such a wonderful experience.
And I will just say, to add to that, if you didn't, you're driving your car and you didn't get all that, you can always go to the Women's Issues, Women's Voices Facebook page and drop me a note, or you can go to WIWV@KOPN.org and send me an email. Just make sure that you put in the subject line something so that I know that email is for me. So anything else you want to say before we wrap up this final poem?
No, I think we can go ahead and read this. I have just really enjoyed talking with you tonight, and thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you.
Really enjoyed it.
This has been a joy.
Okay, so this is called Sometimes I Wonder. Sometimes I wonder if Mary breastfed Jesus, if she cried out when he bit her, or if she sobbed when he would not latch. And sometimes I wonder if this is all too vulgar to ask in a church full of men without milk stains on their shirts or coconut oil on their breasts, preaching from pulpits off limits to the mother of God. But then I think of feeding Jesus, birthing Jesus, the expulsion of blood, the smell of sweat, the salt of a mother's tears onto the soft head of the salt of the earth, feeling lonely and tired, hungry, annoyed, overwhelmed, loving. And I think if the vulgarity of birth is not honestly preached by men who carry power but not burden, who carry privilege but not labor, who carry authority but not submission, then it should not be preached at all. because the real scandal of the birth of God lies in the cracked nipples of a 14-year-old and not in the sermons of ministers who say women are too delicate to lead.
And with that, we'll close out. This is Women's Issues, Women's Voices. Thank you for joining us.